Sir, I've shown you everything. My badge, my ID. I'm supposed to be at work right now. Please, what is this about?
You need to relax. We're verifying your information.
Verifying what? I wasn't doing anything.
The morning of April 17th started like any other Wednesday for Abigail Martins. She woke at 5:30, showered, dressed in her blue scrubs, and clipped her hospital badge to her chest before leaving her modest apartment in Texas by 6:45. She had a 20-minute drive to Memorial Hermann Hospital. She would never arrive for her shift that day. Instead, she would spend over half an hour sitting on the side of a highway, dirt gathering on her scrubs, humiliated in front of strangers who slowed their cars to stare. Federal agents would detain her without checking a single piece of identification she offered. What happened next would ignite national outrage and expose a system operating without accountability or reason. Before we continue, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. This story needs to reach as many people as possible, and your support helps us shine a light on injustices that too often go unnoticed. Now, let's get into what really happened. Abigail Martins was 24 years old. She had graduated from nursing school 2 years earlier and had been working in the pediatric unit at Memorial Hermann ever since. She was born in Texas. Her parents were born in Texas. Her grandparents had settled in Texas generations before, building lives rooted deeply in the state's soil. She was American in every provable sense: birth certificate, social security number, driver's license, passport, work authorization, tax records. She had never been arrested, never been in trouble, never given anyone reason to question her. None of that would matter on this particular morning. At approximately 6:58, Abigail guided her white sedan down Highway 45, heading south toward the hospital. Traffic was light. The early sun stretched long across the asphalt. She was listening to a playlist she had made for morning drives, mentally running through the tasks waiting for her in the pediatric unit. A child recovering from surgery, another starting a new course of treatment, families who needed reassurance. She noticed a dark SUV behind her, but thought nothing of it. Vehicles merged and passed constantly on this stretch of road, then blue lights began flashing in her rear view mirror. Abigail's hands tightened on the wheel. She checked her speedometer instinctively. 53 in a 55 zone. She hadn't run any lights, hadn't drifted lanes, hadn't done anything remotely illegal. Confusion bloomed in her chest, but she did what any reasonable person would do. She signaled, slowed, and pulled onto the grassy shoulder. She shifted into park, turned off the engine, placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but she told herself it would be fine. A broken taillight maybe, a registration issue, something minor that could be cleared up quickly. Two men approached her vehicle. They wore no police uniforms, no marked badges on their chests. Instead, they had on plain clothes, dark cargo pants, tactical vests with the letters ICE stenciled across the front in bold white, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Their badges hung from chains around their necks, swaying as they moved. Abigail's confusion deepened. Why would ICE pull her over? She was a nurse driving to work in scrubs with a hospital badge clipped visibly to her chest. The first agent, later identified as a 15-year veteran named Lance Dorsey, stepped to her window. He did not ask for her license and registration. He did not explain why she had been stopped. His voice was flat, procedural, stripped of inflection. "Step out of the vehicle." Abigail hesitated, her mind scrambling for context. She asked what this was about, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The agent repeated his command, louder this time, as though volume itself were justification. She complied. She opened the door, stepped onto the shoulder, and stood beside her car, her hospital badge catching the morning light. Within seconds, the second agent gestured toward the grass. "Sit down." Not stand by the car, not wait while they ran her information. Sit down on the ground. Abigail lowered herself onto the roadside grass, the blades damp with dew soaking into the fabric of her scrubs. She could feel the texture of dirt and pebbles beneath her palms. Cars began to slow as they passed, drivers craning their necks to see what was happening. Some honked. Others shouted questions she couldn't make out over the noise of the highway. The agents stood over her, arms crossed, their shadows long in the early sun. She offered her driver's license. They ignored it. She held up her hospital badge, explained she was due at Memorial Hermann in minutes, asked if they could verify her employment through the app on her phone. They told her to stay seated, to stay quiet. Minutes passed. 5. Then 10. Abigail asked again what she had been stopped for. The lead agent responded with a single word, flagged. No elaboration. No context. Just flagged, as though the term itself were sufficient grounds to upend her morning and humiliate her in public view. She mentioned her shift, the children waiting for her care, the supervisor who could confirm her identity in seconds. The agents dismissed every offer, their radios crackling with indistinct chatter that did nothing to clarify the situation. Abigail's mind raced backward, searching for anything that might explain this. Hours earlier, she had woken in her small apartment, the same routine she followed every weekday. Alarm at 5:30. Shower. Scrubs laid out the night before, coffee in a travel mug. She had checked her schedule on her phone, 12-hour shift, pediatric unit, 7 to 7. She had driven this exact route hundreds of times without incident. She was not reckless. She was not careless. She kept her personal history quiet, preferring to let her work speak for itself. Few people at the hospital knew that her grandfather had been a civil rights pioneer in Texas during the 1960s, a man who had fought segregation with quiet, relentless resistance. Abigail rarely spoke of that legacy. It felt too large, too heavy to carry into her daily life. She wanted to be known as a nurse, not as someone's granddaughter. But sitting on the grass now, dirt staining her scrubs, she wondered if that history had somehow followed her here. 23 minutes into the stop, a second ICE vehicle pulled onto the shoulder behind the first. 2 more agents stepped out, conferring quietly with the original pair. Abigail strained to hear their conversation. Fragments drifted toward her profile match, description, further verification, nothing that answered her questions. Nothing that justified the growing crowd of onlookers or the public spectacle unfolding around her. A pickup truck slowed and pulled ahead of the scene. The driver, a man in his early 40s wearing a faded work shirt and jeans, climbed out and approached with a casual, friendly demeanor. He nodded at the agents, offering words Abigail couldn't quite hear, his tone suggesting approval or support. The agents acknowledged him briefly, then turned back to their radios. The man, Philip Smith, though Abigail wouldn't learn his name until much later, positioned himself near the shoulder, ostensibly watching the scene with interest. What the agents didn't notice was the phone in his hand, angled carefully to capture the unfolding detention. The camera shook slightly as he adjusted his stance, but it remained focused on Abigail sitting in the grass, her scrubs gathering stains, her posture composed despite the strain visible in the tightness of her shoulders. Philip understood instinctively that something was wrong. He had seen enough in his 41 years to recognize injustice when it presented itself. So he recorded, pretending to be just another bystander, curious about federal operations, knowing the footage might be the only proof that this had happened at all. Abigail's legs began to numb from sitting. The sun climbed higher, its heat pressing down on the asphalt and grass. She could feel sweat gathering at the small of her back, could see the curious stares of drivers slowing to look. Some honked in what seemed like support, others yelled questions she couldn't answer. She thought about the children waiting for her at the hospital. A 6-year-old recovering from appendix surgery who asked for her specifically during rounds. A toddler starting chemotherapy whose parents trusted Abigail to explain the process gently. They were relying on her, and she was sitting on the side of a highway for reasons no one would clarify. Her voice wavered slightly when she asked again, citizenship, nursing license, clean record, all of it documented and verifiable. The agents responded with vague assurances. Commands to remain calm. Warnings not to escalate. 30 minutes stretched into 31. Then, finally, one of the agents took her driver's license and walked back to the vehicle. The verification process took less than 3 minutes. Texas birth, no warrants, no flags, beyond whatever phantom description had justified the stop in the first place. The agent returned, handed back her license without a word, and gestured for her to stand. She was free to go. No apology, no explanation, just a curt wave toward her car. Abigail stood on shaky legs, brushing dirt and grass from her scrubs. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her car keys, struggling to fit them into the ignition. The agents were already walking back to their vehicles, radios crackling, moving on to whatever came next in their day as though the last half hour had been routine procedure. She drove toward Memorial Hermann Hospital in silence, her playlist still paused from when she had first pulled over. She arrived 40 minutes late, parking in the employee lot and sitting motionless behind the wheel as the reality of what had just happened settled over her like a weight. When she finally stepped out of the car, her legs still felt unsteady. She checked her reflection in the side mirror, scrubs wrinkled and stained, eyes red-rimmed, badge still clipped to her chest. She composed herself as best she could and walked into the hospital, clocking in without explanation, moving through her shift on autopilot while her mind replayed every moment on that highway shoulder. The second agent who had arrived in the backup vehicle joined the cluster of men conferring near the SUVs. Their voices carried intermittently across the highway shoulder, fragments of conversation drifting toward where Abigail sat. Philip's phone captured most of it, the audio muffled but audible enough to piece together the justification they were using. Dark-skinned woman, sedan, heading south. That was the description, nothing more specific, no distinguishing marks, no license plate, no actual suspicion of criminal activity. Just a vague profile that could have described tens of thousands of women driving through Texas on any given morning. The baselessness of it settled over the scene like a fog, exposing the stop for what it was, a procedure built on assumption rather than evidence. Abigail's voice wavered when she spoke again. She reiterated her citizenship, her role at the hospital, the clean record she had maintained her entire life. She asked once more if they could simply check her identification or allow her to call her supervisor. The agents responded with rehearsed assurances. "Remain calm. We're handling this. Standard procedure." Their words meant nothing, offered no clarity, only prolonged the detention past the point of reason. 31 minutes. 32. 33. Philip continued recording from his position near the shoulder, adjusting his angle to capture the agent's dismissive gestures and Abigail's restrained composure. He moved closer under the pretense of casual observation, nodding occasionally as though approving of their work. The agents paid him no mind. He was just another citizen, satisfied to see enforcement in action. They didn't notice the phone, didn't register that every second of their negligence was being documented with timestamps and clear visuals. Abigail's physical discomfort grew with each passing minute. Her legs had gone numb from sitting cross-legged on the uneven ground. Grass stains darkened the knees of her scrubs. The sun beat down without mercy, the heat radiating off the asphalt in waves. Sweat gathered at her hairline, her back, beneath the fabric of her hospital badge. She thought about the life she had built quietly, without fanfare. Nursing school had been grueling, but she had graduated with honors. Her job in the pediatric unit was demanding, emotionally exhausting, but deeply fulfilling. She showed up on time. She followed protocols. She saved lives in small, incremental ways that rarely made headlines. She was ordinary in the best sense, someone who contributed without seeking recognition. But sitting on that highway shoulder, she also thought about the legacy she carried silently. Her grandfather had fought segregation in Texas during the 1960s, organizing sit-ins and marches, enduring arrests and threats, refusing to accept a system that treated him as less than human. He had passed that quiet resistance down through the family, a strength that didn't announce itself but endured nonetheless. Abigail rarely spoke of it. She had wanted to be judged on her own merits, not her lineage. Now, detained without cause, she wondered if that legacy had been waiting for a moment like this all along. Do you think Philip did the right thing by stepping in to record? Type yes or no in the comments below and share what you would have done in his shoes, or pass the story along to spark a conversation about bystander action. At 34 minutes, one of the agents finally took Abigail's driver's license and walked back to the lead vehicle. He disappeared inside, the door closing with a heavy thud. Abigail watched, her heart hammering, knowing the verification would take minutes at most. Everything she had told them was true, her Texas birth, her clean record, her citizenship status, all of it documented in systems they had access to within seconds. 3 minutes later, the agent emerged. He walked back toward her, license in hand, his expression unchanged. No acknowledgement of error, no recognition of the time wasted, or the humiliation inflicted. He handed the card back without a word and gestured toward her vehicle. She was free to go. Abigail stared at him, waiting for something more. An apology, an explanation, some acknowledgement that the last 37 minutes had been a mistake. None came. The agents were already turning away, radios crackling, moving on as though detaining a nurse on her way to work was just another item checked off a list. She stood on shaky legs, her joints stiff from prolonged sitting. She brushed at the dirt clinging to her scrubs, the stains already set into the fabric. Her hands trembled as she walked back to her car, fumbling with the door handle before sliding into the driver's seat. The engine turned over on the second try. She sat for a moment, gripping the wheel, trying to steady her breathing. Then she drove. The hospital parking lot was nearly full by the time Abigail arrived, 43 minutes late for her shift. She pulled into an employee space near the back, far from the main entrance, and shut off the engine. The silence pressed in around her. She stared at the dashboard, at the clock reading 7:43, and felt something inside her crack. She cried quietly, her shoulders shaking, her hands still gripping the wheel. The tears came hard and fast, carrying with them the fear she had suppressed on that highway shoulder, the humiliation of being watched by strangers, the helplessness of sitting in the dirt while men with badges refused to listen. She cried until her chest ached, until her eyes burned, until there was nothing left. Then she wiped her face, checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and forced herself to breathe normally. She had patients waiting, children who needed her care, families who depended on her steady presence. She couldn't fall apart now. She stepped out of the car, smoothed her stained scrubs as best she could, and walked into the hospital. The shift passed in a blur. Abigail moved through her rounds on autopilot, administering medication, checking vitals, comforting frightened children with the same gentle voice she always used. Her colleagues noticed she seemed off, quieter than usual, distracted, but she deflected their concerns with vague mentions of traffic delays. She didn't have the words yet to explain what had happened. That night, back in her apartment, she sat on her couch and stared at her phone. She had thought about the stop all day, replaying every moment, every refusal, every dismissive gesture. She wondered if she should report it, wondered if it would matter, wondered if anyone would believe her without proof. Her phone buzzed, a message from a mutual acquaintance, someone who knew both Abigail and Philip through overlapping social circles. The message was brief. Someone recorded what happened to you this morning. He wants you to have the video. Abigail's hands shook as she arranged to meet Philip 2 days later at a quiet coffee shop. He handed her a flash drive without ceremony, explaining only that he had seen the stop, recognized something was wrong, and started recording. He wanted nothing in return. No recognition, no payment, just the knowledge that she would have evidence if she chose to use it. She thanked him, her voice barely steady, and went home. That night, Abigail plugged the flash drive into her laptop and watched the video for the first time. She saw herself from Philip's perspective, a small figure in blue scrubs sitting on the grass, hands folded in her lap, shoulders tight with restrained fear. She heard her own voice asking questions that went unanswered. She watched the agents ignore her ID, dismiss her offers to verify her employment, wave her off after 37 minutes as though the entire ordeal had been routine. She watched the video 3 times. Each viewing clarified something she had felt but couldn't articulate on that highway shoulder. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a system operating exactly as designed. Vague descriptions, weaponized, procedures ignored, people reduced to profiles that justified detention without cause. By the 3rd viewing, her tears had stopped. In their place was something sharper, more durable. A resolve that felt almost familiar, as though it had been passed down through generations, waiting for the moment she would need it. She closed the laptop, saved the video in multiple locations, and began researching civil rights attorneys. Within a week, Abigail sat across from an attorney who specialized in civil rights violations. The woman reviewed the video 3 times, taking notes, pausing to rewind sections where the agent's dismissiveness was most apparent. When she finished, she looked at Abigail and said what Abigail already knew. This is textbook 4th Amendment violation, unlawful detention, racial profiling. We have grounds. The lawsuit was filed quietly at first, naming the agents involved and the agency that employed them. The video was submitted as evidence, time-stamped, unedited, capturing every second of the 37-minute detention. Within days, a journalist covering immigration enforcement obtained a copy and published it alongside a story detailing Abigail's credentials, her spotless record, and the vague description that had justified the stop. The response was immediate. The video spread across social media platforms, accumulating millions of views within 48 hours. People shared it with captions expressing outrage, disbelief, solidarity. News outlets picked up the story, dissecting the agent's actions frame by frame, questioning how a U.S. citizen nurse could be detained without cause on her way to save lives. Public pressure built rapidly, but the real shock came during the lawsuit proceedings when Abigail's attorney revealed a detail she had kept private for most of her life. Abigail Martins was the granddaughter of James Martins, a Texas civil rights pioneer who had led desegregation efforts in the 1960s. His work had been instrumental in dismantling Jim Crow laws across the state, his name appearing in history books and museum exhibits documenting the struggle for equality. Abigail had rarely spoken of this legacy, preferring to build her own life separate from her grandfather's shadow. Now, that connection amplified the case into something larger. Influential civil rights organizations offered support. Legal teams with decades of experience joined the effort. The narrative shifted from one nurse's unlawful detention to a systemic pattern of bias within an agency operating with insufficient oversight. Media coverage intensified. Analysts dissected the description used to justify the stop dark-skinned woman driving a sedan, pointing out that it could apply to millions of people. They questioned how such a vague profile could authorize federal agents to detain a citizen without verifying basic identification. ICE defended the stop as part of a broader operation targeting undocumented individuals, but the defense crumbled under scrutiny. No operation had been documented in that area on that date. No alerts had been issued. The description existed only in the agent's discretion, applied without evidence or verification. Internal investigations began. Records were reviewed. Other stops conducted by the same agents came under examination, revealing a pattern of vague justifications and prolonged detentions. The agency's procedures, or lack thereof, became subject to federal inquiry. The case moved quickly, propelled by public outrage and irrefutable evidence. Within 6 months, the lead agent, Lance Dorsey, was terminated after 15 years of service. The termination letter cited violations of protocol, bias in enforcement decisions, and failure to verify identification when readily available. Other agents involved received 90-day suspensions without pay, mandatory retraining on civil rights and bias recognition, and permanent marks on their records that would follow them through any future assignments. But the accountability extended beyond individual agents. Policy changes followed, implemented under pressure from lawmakers and advocacy groups. ICE field operations would now require body cameras during all stops and detentions. Supervisors would conduct quarterly bias audits. Agents would undergo annual retraining on constitutional protections and appropriate use of discretion. Oversight mechanisms were strengthened, creating pathways for citizens to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. The settlement came next. ICE agreed to a 6-figure payout, the exact amount undisclosed, but substantial enough to acknowledge the harm inflicted. More importantly, the agency issued a public statement admitting the stop had been unlawful, the detention unjustified, and the treatment of Abigail Martins a failure of procedure and judgment. For Abigail, the money mattered less than the admission. It was acknowledgment official documented, impossible to retract that what had happened to her on that highway shoulder was wrong. Healing took time. Abigail attended therapy sessions to process the trauma, the hypervigilance that made her check her mirrors constantly while driving, the nightmares where she was sitting on the grass again, unable to stand. Her family supported her quietly, her parents attending court hearings, her grandfather's legacy providing a framework for understanding injustice as something that could be fought and overcome. Her colleagues at Memorial Hermann rallied around her, covering shifts when she needed time for legal proceedings, offering words of encouragement when the process felt overwhelming. Slowly, the anxiety began to recede. She started driving without checking her mirrors every few seconds. She stopped flinching when she saw vehicles with government plates. She returned to work full-time, resuming her role in the pediatric unit with renewed focus. The children she cared for knew nothing of lawsuits or settlements. They knew her as the nurse who explained procedures gently, who stayed late to comfort frightened parents, who showed up consistently even when the work was exhausting. Philip Smith remained largely in the background, uncomfortable with attention. When journalists asked to interview him, he agreed reluctantly, emphasizing only that he had done what anyone should do when witnessing injustice: document it, preserve it, share it with those who could use it to demand accountability. He didn't consider himself a hero, just someone who happened to be in the right place with a phone in his hand. But his footage became something larger than a single incident. It was used in training sessions for law enforcement agencies across the country, a case study in what happens when procedures fail and bias goes unchecked. It circulated in civil rights classrooms, discussed by students learning how evidence transforms invisible injustices into undeniable facts. The story concluded not with spectacle, but with quiet persistence. Abigail returned to her life, carrying her grandfather's legacy not as a burden, but as a reminder that justice requires evidence, courage, and relentless demand. She spoke at forums when invited, sharing her experience to help others understand the importance of accountability and the fragility of rights that seem guaranteed until they're violated. The video remained accessible, a permanent record of 37 minutes that should never have happened. It stood as proof that systems designed to protect can also harm when operated without oversight, that descriptions can be weaponized, that citizenship offers no protection against bias masquerading as procedure. And it reminded everyone who watched that change doesn't happen through silence. It happens when someone records, when someone files a lawsuit, when someone refuses to accept injustice as routine. Abigail Martins went back to saving lives, one pediatric patient at a time, carrying within her the quiet strength of generations who had fought before her. The video became a symbol, the lawsuit became precedent, and the system, however slowly, began to shift under the weight of evidence it could no longer ignore.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.